All right, we're here today with Ed Wilson from Harvard University. Ed, it's a true pleasure to be here with you. And I know it's relatively well known, but could you kindly give us your brief academic background, where you earned your degrees and where you worked?
Yeah, it's a real pleasure, an honor, and for me, the meeting of an opportunity to talk a little bit back about the background I've had in those subjects that are relevant to HBES. I realized that when I got the letter from you, I was at the original meeting. And in fact, in my memoir, Naturalist is the title, is a photograph labeled Founders of Sociobiology that was taken at that meeting in the evening. At any rate, I'm a Southerner. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama. I grew up mostly in Alabama. My forebears are mostly from that state, and I have strong connections with the state to this day, although I have been at Harvard University for 62 years. I'm trying to set some kind of a record. I've been active on the faculty, or student faculty, and now retired faculty, but very active. I went to the University of Alabama, the first of my family to ever attend college, and there I got the big break that I needed in order to go into a life in science. However, I came to the University of Alabama well prepared in some aspects of science, thanks to the Boy Scouts of America. The schools in Alabama, when I was coming through public schools in that state, that was during the late Depression and into the war years, were not very, they were not very good. But I got a pretty good education by moving through the ranks in the Boy Scouts of America and earning merit badges right and left. I was a nature counselor. I was made a nature counselor at the camp, Boy Scout camp outside Mobile when I was only 14, and that kind of thing. So I had a lot of encouragement and was building confidence that I could make a life in science and natural history. If I got on to college, actually I wasn't ambitious. I wanted to be either a part naturalist, looking back now I think that would have been a fine thing to have achieved, or a economic entomologist, one of these people who would ride around in green trucks and advises farmers on how to eliminate their corn borers. But when I got to the University of Alabama, then the world really opened up to me, because at that time I learned from books like Ernst Mayer's Systematica and the Origin of Species, and manuals and contact with others, that the studies that I had been making as a completely independent young naturalist, living in the field a large part of my boyhood, and moving through the Boy Scouts of America merit badge sequence, that field, that subject I most wanted to be, one way or the other, was a science. And that was a wonderful revolution. It meant that I could go to the University of Alabama and become a scientist by taking the courses, by doing the research and the like. By this time it began to dawn on me that there are two kinds of people. There are those who go into science in order to make a living, and those who make a living one way or the other in order to be in science. And I was certainly of the latter kind. Therefore, I was able to follow a professional pathway that made this possible for me to be in science and go on in science. After taking 2 degrees at the University of Alabama, the master's as well as the BS, I moved on to the University of Tennessee. That was as far north as I ever wanted to be. It was way up there in Knoxville. But while I was there, the first year, a very kind professor of botanist, a man named Aaron Sharp, who was nationally recognized botanist. I got to know pretty well. And bless him, he wrote contacts at Harvard, specifically in the Society of Fellows, an elite group of fellows who are given 3 years to do anything they wished. And said, in effect, this kid does not belong here, he belongs at Harvard. And I got an invitation to apply, and then I was admitted the next year with scholarship. So that was the kind of break I wish would be open to all young scholars, but that really got me going. And I had a lot of adjusting to do. I had my roommate, maybe it was done on purpose, a Nigerian who was, as it turned out, head of leader of a local Nigerian revolutionary movement. So frequently in the room while I was studying, a group of not just black true Africans would meet, but they would gather all around. I almost felt maybe I should join them to be congenial, plotting the overthrow of Great Britain from Nigeria, which in effect did occur. So I had many experiences of this kind and adapted to Harvard, and I believe made full use of its resources. I acquired tenure at a fairly young age. Fortunately, after I'd been junior professor only 3 years, I got a tenure offer from Stanford, and I was headed out the door joyously when they stopped me and said, give us a chance to keep you here, which they did, and I was thus promoted. I think at 28 I was. And that's another story connected with that I don't want to go into, but it's interesting to mention it, which is that the other young professor, assistant professor, we were the only ones here in the Department of Biology. All the rest were middle-aged and older people, was Jim Watson. I can't say Jim and I were friends because, I was the only younger professor in what came to be known as evolutionary biology, a term I invented, incidentally, and started here at Harvard. It was Jim Watson's wish that I and other of the old-fashioned biologists not leave the university but find place elsewhere than the biological laboratories and so on. So we were not on friendly terms. He was a very difficult person to deal with. And unfortunately, by a clerical error or just oversight by the president's office, I was given tenure at Harvard before Watson, who was then furious and would not speak to me for years. We are now close friends and have been together on a Charlie Rose show and things like this together. And one of the reasons for this was that the principle, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Because Watson was even more furious later in the 70s when Richard Lewontin and Steve Gould and other bio-Marxist stars on the Harvard faculty not only set out to destroy sociobiology and any heresy of this kind, but also managed through the student protesters and by appealing to the Cambridge City Council to have DNA recombinant studies prohibited in the city of Cambridge on the grounds that they would be dangerous and they were bad for humanity. That was, in the early days of DNA, that's the kind of craziness we had, but that was later to come. And to get back to to the brief history. At Harvard, I had wonderful opportunities to do what I wanted to do. I was elected to the Society of Fellows. That gave me 3 years mainly to spend in the field. And at that time, I at long last completed or realized a dream that I'd had ever since I wandered around in the swamps of Alabama and northern Florida to go to what I later called the big tropics. That is, to Central America, to the West Indies, and then finally South Pacific, where I spent 10 years working my way through places like Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Queensland, and New Guinea, coming back fully prepared to obtain what I then obtained, which was the assistant professorship at Harvard. And I was also primed to do basic work. At that time, it was to be in biogeography. So that was how I got in the field, natural history. The foundation subject, scientific natural history, was true then, is true today for the development of fields such as sociobiology, island biogeography, and even realms of psychology.
Speaking of sociobiology,
Sure.
in large part we're here because of your 1975 book. In large part, all of these books are here because of your 1975
Well,
book.
thank you for that.
How did it all start?
Well, I did want to tell you about that because I think there's probably no living person. Unfortunately, we've lost a lot,
That's why we're doing this project.
including folks who were at the HBS first meeting. It boggles me to think that that much time has passed and that many people have passed.
25 years, Bill Hamilton,
25 years ago.
John Maynard Smith,
Yeah. Well, as we would say,
George Williams.
bless my soul. Yes, that's a lot. I feel lucky to make it here. I'll be 85 in June, and I'll be bringing out, I have in press or in preparation 2 books, with a third forthcoming, so I've been lucky to keep going. I think of ourselves as, say, an age cohort, particularly, in the development of fields, as an old-fashioned line of charging cavalrymen or infantrymen across a field into fire, artillery or rifle fire, and who will drop, and who will be wounded and have to slow down, and who will continue walking is totally random. And I am happy to have been lucky enough to keep walking forward more slowly, but here at a great place like Harvard. Now I'm going to tell you just how sociobiology got started, and from it, with less intimacy and possibly accuracy, how evolutionary psychology got started.
Please.
We have to go back to the 1950s. In the 1950s, the molecular revolution had begun. It was clear that the golden age of modern biology was going to be molecular, and that was going to endure a long time. In fact, it did occupy the second half of the 20th century and beyond. We felt here at Harvard immediately the pressure from the first molecular biologist plus biochemist already here to give way and start giving up positions to molecular biology. The dean of the faculty, the president at that time, were wholly in accord. So we found, I say we, the organismic and evolutionary biologists here, comparative anatomists, comparative zoologists, and so on, realized that we were not going to be giving much space anymore, additional space, and that we probably would not get many, if any, more new positions for a long time. They would be reserved to build up Harvard's strength in molecular and cellular biology. What this did was to have a tremendous impact on me personally, because I realized as an enormous admirer of the Watson-Crick achievement, that's so simple. I should have known that from Darwin. That's so simple an idea, in this case phenomenon, could have such enormous implication, and that like striking gold, it could be sometimes discovered in unexpected ways. We had believed, incidentally, that at that time, prior to 1953, that it was the search for the genetic code would go well into the 21st century.
Is that right?
We believe that, where, most of us did, graduate students, people in seminars, because we assumed that it was going to be a complex protein code. When it turned out to be DNA, which many thought was just to stiffen the protein, it was a total surprise. So I realized that those of us, my generation of young, what we came to call evolutionary biologists and organismic biologists, were not going to get anywhere about complaining by any means, but we were going to have to, and we should be tremendously excited to plan this, develop an equivalent to molecular biology on our own. So I organized, with the help of Robert MacArthur, who was then at Pennsylvania and about to go to Princeton, who was the avatar, the young avatar about my age, in ecology, who trained under Evelyn Hutchinson at Yale, a brilliant evolutionary ecologist who in fact founded the field and doesn't get nearly enough credit as one of the modern synthesizers, along with Dobzhansky and Simpson, Meyer and others. At any rate, he was an inspirational figure there at Yale, and MacArthur was beginning a series of really outstanding papers on basic simplified theory applied to complex ecological and community ecological databases. MacArthur and I, by this time, I had already discovered the first pheromones and pheromone sources in ants. So I guess what was to become my notion of sociobiology was beginning to form in the back of my mind. But I got together with MacArthur, and then we added Larry Slobodkin, who was also trained at Yale and who was at the University of Michigan at that time, and two or three others, but that included Richard Lewontin, who was, because under Dobzhansky's guidance at Columbia, had been the first to utilize electrophoresis to count alleles in Drosophila and to find that the number of alleles was more than had been expected. But this was in accord with what Dobzhansky believes, his professor, in a dispute with H.J. Mueller, who had won the Nobel Prize for discovering that radiation, hard radiation, causes mutations. Lewontin at that point had made the discovery that Dobzhansky was correct, which sort of exemplified or underscored the principle that one way to advance in academia is to prove the thesis of your professor in a new and clever way. In any case, this was the group, Egbert Lee was another one, who decided to get together, but it was mostly centered on MacArthur and myself, to figure out how to move ecology and evolutionary biology, it didn't have that name then, and the ologies, the disciplines focused explicitly on different groups of organisms: entomologists, algologists, bacteriologists, herpetologists and so on. This was the population of people and expertise, knowledge, a body of expertise, that we wanted to see some movement in. Much of it at that time was dominated by aging men. They were the champions of the modern synthesis, still alive and still in dominant position. But we would then be the young generation, late 20s, early 30s, who would move out and find a whole new direction. And that's exactly what we set out to do. So Bodkin soon fell to the side. He had a dispute over some darn thing or another with MacArthur. And Lewontin sort of lost interest early. And this left MacArthur and me plotting. And we said to one another, what is a subject that could be radically modified, wrested away from the aging aristocracy, and modified into something that might rival in rigor and excitement, at least part of molecular biology. So we began meeting and developing a whole new theory of what we came to call island biogeography. We did this, we were able to do this because we combined MacArthur's passion and abilities in natural history. He was an ardent student of birds, and his ability at model building. He was steeped in a tradition of trying out models top down in ecology, and he made important contributions already. He was looked on as a young, as I mentioned, I believe earlier, the avatar of ecology, the guy to look at who was going to do something really good in ecology. Unfortunately, Robert died of cancer at 42 in 1971 or thereabouts, and we lost a really brilliant light. At any rate, he was to combine that, those abilities, with what I knew about the distribution of animals. That was my field. I really was steeped in that. And I had just returned from a deliberate trip along the Melanesian archipelago from New Guinea to Fiji to the New Hebrides, now Vanuatu, to New Caledonia, down the whole line of archipelagos, with the explicit purpose of working out what the principles were of the distribution and island evolution of the ants. And I did succeed in a paper early in the 60s, at about the time I was started with MacArthur, called the taxon cycle. I discovered it, on a cycle of evolution that species go through as they make it across the water gaps between the archipelagos, and then a cycle of change, of species formation and so on, which I'm happy to say has been, taxon cycle has now been pretty well verified in other groups like reptiles and birds and so on. So I had that, and I had this notion that there was something going on concerning the colonization of islands and what we called at first the saturation of island faunas and floras. And MacArthur and I set out to put that together. And we did. In 1963, we published the first paper that put together the theory of island biogeography. And 4 years later, since that was thoroughly ignored, in science, you've got to remember that unless you've got a paper on the order of the first photographs of Martians, at work, or the discovery of a new genetic code, your paper is not going to be read except by a small group of specialists. If you want to have impact, even if you have a fundamental paper, you're not likely to get impact until you write a book.
Yep.
I knew that, and so we got together and we wrote a book called The Theory of Island Biogeography. That came out in '67. In the course of writing a book, we performed a wonderful exercise, which is to see how the notion of the process of island biogeography could apply to broader principles of ecology, such as competition, of resource limitation, of density-dependent natural selection. And we soon found that we were talking about a broad realm of ecology. And we also began to pick up on the idea that maybe there ought to be something called conservation biology that would be have an underpinning. And so the book was, excuse me, a major success. Now I come back to the little group that met. First, the only meeting we had really was at MacArthur's summer place in Vermont. That group I listed, and we sort of talked around. Another one, incidentally, was Richard Levins, who came in. He's a cohort of Lewontin. I started thinking. By this time, I had been thoroughly converted by the appearance of, here at Harvard, 1, 2, 3 in the 50s, of Tinbergen, of Lawrence, and of von Frisch, whom I met. We both worked on social insects.
Sure.
So I had met these giants
Pillars.
of ethology, and I had become completely convinced that where they had worked on releasers, sign stimuli, so successfully had been in birds and mammals, that the ants, with complex social behavior, in which I knew thoroughly now, were doing that, so they must be communicating with chemical releasers. So calling them that, in 1959, I had just gone after searching for the source of in this case, a trail substance, and I succeeded. I helped start by 1960 with natural products chemist, using the newfangled technology called mass spectrometry, gas chromatography, brand new, and they could identify millions of grams, millions of a gram, I should say, which revolutionized the whole thing, because up to that you could only identify a hormone or a pheromone with milligram quantities, which meant you had to sacrifice large numbers of individuals. I love that term, sacrifice, which means you kill a lot of little animals. At any rate, so now we were off and running. We started finding pheromones, the glandular source. Other entomologists were engaged in it, became engaged in this. The chemist, the natural product chemist, found it rich ground to work on. And I was working into that area at the time. We had the meeting in Marlborough, Vermont, where MacArthur's place was. While I was working out the theory of island biogeography with MacArthur, I was thinking, what we wanted to accomplish vis-a-vis our rivals in molecular biologists, the David-Goliath combination, if there ever was one, might be accomplished in the study of social behavior. So it was then that I decided I would write something that was badly needed, because there was nothing like it. And that was a thorough review of everything known about the social insects. And then I would do more than that. Namely, I would recognize that every field has to have a foundation discipline. With my work with MacArthur and the others, particularly in the Vermont group, I realized that the foundational group of discipline has to be population biology. if you're going to work on social behavior, because a society is population. And populational phenomena are rife in the study of any animal society, at least. I had written already a textbook on population biology with a brilliant young graduate student here, Bill Bosser. He was one of my students, and then later became a tenured professor in applied mathematics. But he worked with me, and I realized that this was the way to go, to work out the principles of social behavior on a foundation of population biology. That the components would be population ecology, the ecology of whole population, the genetics of populations, population genetics, and that's the way I built it. So I wrote published in 1971, the Insect Societies. I believe it's been widely forgotten, but it is a standard book still on the fundamentals of biology and social sciences. Well, some of it is now outdated. But if you want to go to the book that tells you all the basic things, you know, about the life cycle of a stingless bee, for example, or the classification of the termites, just what is a mastrotermitid and where they found and so on, that's where you go. So I wrote that, and it was a success among colleagues, but it's forgotten maybe widely that the final chapter, 1971, was entitled The Prospects of a Unified Sociobiology. And I decided that's what we should call the whole field. And then I argued in that chapter that the foundation would be population biology, for the reasons that I've just mentioned. And that was fairly successful. It did have quite an impact, actually, on the study of social insects. But now I realize that most of the action and the attention of people, partly thanks to the European trio, or at least Lawrence and Tinbergen, was on vertebrates, on birds and fish and so on, and that nobody was going to pay any attention to social insects outside of the entomologists working on them, unless I included the vertebrates. So I set out to redo the insect societies, and now to include the vertebrate animals with trepidation, because I expected ridicule and laughter. You know, what could you possibly tell us about vertebrate? I had the opposite reaction. I discovered then, and I recommend it to others, although now the connectivity of the net and all that probably makes it unnecessary. But I went about it writing humble letters to all of the people I could find who was working on social behavior of vertebrates. Ethology it was called in those days. And humbly requesting sets of their papers, I said, which I wanted to include in a general synthesis I was going to write on social behavior. And the response to that was not laughter, but it was to be buried in regrets. Because people, that's what I do, I mean, it's what most people do if you're told it, that someone wants to use your work, you know, to help build a new field or a synthesis or whatever. You're going to be damn sure that even the most obscure of your papers. But through that, and through the help, the cooperation, the advice, the reviews of vertebrate ethologists, we called themselves in those days, I put together the book Sociobiology. And it came out in 1975. The reaction to it became a chapter that we can discuss separately. But to complete this little introduction of what happened and why it happened, I should add that with the Vesuvian explosion of response from my former friends and colleagues, Lewinson and Gould and a few others around Harvard, and then a few others, and from leftists generally. Remember, in the United States in the middle 70s, we were just pulling out of Vietnam, and it was understandable that the left dominated thinking in universities still, and that included a prohibition on any arguments about genetic basis of behavior. It was taken to an extreme by the anti-sociobiology people, including those here at Harvard, by saying even to mention it for animals opens the door to racism, feminism, and I guess, God forbid, capitalism, and therefore it should be forbidden, literally forbidden. And that, after taking rough treatment for a couple of years, I said the only way I'm going to get out of this mess is to, because I wrote a chapter on humans to close sociobiology, and a very mild-mannered chapter, and I believe foolishly that the social scientists would snap this up. You know, they'd say, good, finally the biologists have given us something to use and think about in social behavior. Yes, now these biologists, you know, their mind has been on hormones and DNA and unpronounceably named cycles, biochemical cycles. Now they're going to say something intelligent to us on behavior. The reaction was the opposite, because we were in the extreme environmentalist period, environmentalist non-genetic period of thinking. So after taking this punishment for 3 years, or 2 years, and I started writing a book. I said the only way I'm going to get out of this is to explain the whole thing, how I see it, and without picking up on any particular ideology. Heaven forbid that I would say there might be racial differences in intelligence or some crazy suicidal thing like that. I would write about the rest, all of it, and explain it, and why there's no reason to fear sociobiology, and why it might have some value for others. And I wrote on human nature. And this, I will claim, sitting here, is the true origin of evolutionary psychology. Because I paid close attention to psychological literature then, and I followed it quickly, and it was not an obscure book. It won the Pulitzer Prize and received a tremendous amount of attention. In the Washington Post review, for the first time in the history of the Washington Post book review, they devoted 2 chapters to the review over 2 weeks. That's attention.
Sure.
At any rate, and as they say in a football game, when the visiting team scores a touchdown, in the midst of eardrum bursting noise coming from the home crowd, that silenced the crowd. I think On Human Nature and the recognition it got tended to was the beginning of the end of the more vituperative and dishonest and ideological opposition to sociobiology. But that didn't satisfy me, and I quickly went to what I thought, and I still think, to be one of the great remaining problems of sociobiology and evolutionary psychology. and that is gene culture coevolution. We know that the phenotype of social behavior, insofar as they have heritability, are influenced by genes to some extent, genetic evolution to some extent. Cultural evolution is influenced to some, probably measurable extent, by genetic evolution. And conversely, genetic evolution certainly is influenced to some degree by cultural evolution. And this is one of the great problems of modern biology and the social sciences. So I gathered up another very bright postdoc who named Charles Munson, a Canadian, and we set out in 1980 to develop gene culture coevolution as a theory. We published a book on it, and having it met with thunderous silence, decided we'd write another book, this time for almost for what you might call a middle brow audience, called the Promethean Fire, and that was ignored. So I've always wondered why no interest to, or so little interest to this day has come from evolutionary psychologists or population biologists on this subject. I mean, it's a gold mine, and it's still relatively unvisited. And now that brings me back quickly to the early divorce of evolutionary psychology and sociobiology. And I'm aware that the original name of the society was something of HBES, was something like Sociobiology and Evolutionary Psychology, or something like that.
I don't know.
What?
I don't know. I know the journal was
Oh.
initially called Ethology and Sociobiology.
That was it.
And then in
Okay.
1996 they...
Okay,
wrote
well,
it
we
to-
didn't really need that because we had those of us in sociobiology of animals, because we had already early founded, with the help and support of von Frisch, the journal Behavioral Ecology and Sociobiology, of which my colleague Bert Holdrover and I were founding editors, at least we had editorial function. Well, there we had evolutionary psychology forming, and I'm willing to be braced by this, by those in evolutionary psychologists who would like to think that they created the field, and listen carefully to their arguments. But I will argue that the book on human nature presented some key central ideas that were to be part of what is called evolutionary psychology. And now I've just reread portions of David Buss's Handbook of Evolutionary Psychology, wondering about this. And of course, having been the one that took the punishment in the late 70s, for sociobiology, then like an old fighter with flattened nose and mushroom ears, I assumed that nobody really would like to be called a sociobiologist. And I just assumed when my colleagues now in HBES sort of went their own way, that they dropped the word sociobiology because they would just as soon not want to be engaged in warfare of this kind, particularly since it would affect grants and their promotion and everything else. And I could scarcely doubt them. But to my surprise, the few times that I've spoken with evolutionary psychologists of the new mold, one was Randolph Neese.
Sure, we're interviewing him as well. Keep going.
Yeah, who assured me, no, we never even thought of that. that it would not be politically expeditious to use the word sociobiology. We decided that this is primarily a psychological field, and that's the way we would go, psychological, medical, whatever.
Yep.
And now I've read the one footnote by David Buss, who stresses in a footnote, if you can stress anything in a footnote, that, oh no, this was not anything that we were afraid of. He said it never crossed our mind when we brought up the name sociobiology. We just decided that we wanted to be identified as psychologists for career purposes, and that makes sense to me. But poor little sociobiology, I'm talking about the word now, was suddenly orphaned. The people in psychology, in evolutionary psychology, and anthropology too, the ones that were at the same time crucifying Napshagnon, would have none of it, as long as it seemed, as long as it was infected by the anthemic terms or ambience of racism and all the various things that America needed to get rid of. It was orphaned, and so it has been. It's not often mentioned. It's not often used, the word sociobiology. And now, since I can speak on a record that may be listened to by generously 1% of my colleagues right away in HVES, and I hope later by historians, I'm going to point out a fundamental mistake, a strategic mistake the evolutionary psychologist made, and that is not to do with terminology. It was to ally themselves primarily with psychology at a level of biological organization thereby, which without a foundational field. The foundational field, at the outset anyway, should have been population biology. And the explanations that it produces, and that they have produced actually without reference to population biology, with only seldom reference to population biology, the purpose of the foundational field is to suggest explanations at the next level of biology down. And by kind of wandering away from that and maintaining their independence in name and in many cases technology and data gathering, I think they made a serious mistake. Thumbing through David Buss's compendium, however, I find that no matter what they say, they seem to be drifting back to to genetic reasoning, and they furthermore have, I should say, the evolutionary psychologists have, enthusiastically embraced neurobiology like a wealthy lover. They realize that that's a winner. Yeah. And furthermore, legitimately, they realize that the understanding of the circuitry and processes of the brain, which is foundational truly, in a functional level, whereas population biology allows it to be foundational in a ultimate explanatory level, explaining why and what kind of history it had and why that history was so and so. They would now, I think, draw strength to great strength from alliances with neurobiology. On the other hand, it's time for some of them to come back home and start openly looking at population biology as a discipline. And because that's foundational, and they will certainly draw strength from doing it without fear, this now, of condemnation or lower level, lowering in their status. Quite the contrary. Population biology is a very sophisticated and powerful field. And the discipline that's working very well at a single level of biological organization, which has been so much the case in evolutionary psychology, should remember the story of Antaeus, the giant, who could defeat all earthly champions. So, but they could defeat him if only they grabbed him and lifted him above his mother earth and held him there until he grew weak and surrendered. So it was Antaeus' custom to find a way to get down to earth again, gather strength and rise. So the Antaeus, I think, myth is appropriate in this case. So that concludes my history, which I've given to you, I hope, up to, shall we say, the sociobiology itself, and then a few glimmerings beyond, in which I return to these subjects.
If I may, I wouldn't mind jumping in.
Sure, we can go on now from wherever you care to go.
On the relationship between sociobiology and evolutionary psychology.
What?
On the relationship between sociobiology and evolutionary psychology. Much as sociobiology really got its start here with you and your collaborators, what I've learned from this project is evolutionary psychology as a discipline also largely got its start here. So people like David Buss, as you mentioned earlier, by the way, he was my former graduate advisor, he says hello. He says he met you in 81 or 82 when he was an assistant professor here.
Yes.
And that he was heavily...
No, I've forgotten that if I ever knew it, yeah. Well, let me exchange admiration and warm remarks to David. He's been a real warrior and synthesizer and spokesman for evolutionary psychology.
He emailed me yesterday and said, please tell Ed how much sociobiology meant to me, how much it influenced me, and we've had conversations over the years that he's cherished. Well, when he was here as an assistant professor, I think 81 to 85 or so, Lita Cosmides and John Tooby were also here as graduate students.
I know that.
And my take from them on how evolutionary psychology came to be was, in light of everyone talking about evolution and social behavior here,
Yep.
and I put to Lita in the interview we had with her in Miami Beach in July, why she and others focused on this term, evolutionary psychology. And my sense on their answer was that there's a much greater emphasis in evolutionary psychology than in sociobiology on the cognitive mechanisms, the information processing mechanisms that mediate and give rise to behavior. So it's not so much a focus on social behavior, but the mechanisms that give rise to it. And that's the sense I get from David, from Lita, and from John about why they called it evolutionary psychology. They did found it, as far as I can tell, on evolutionary biology, not necessarily population biology. And so much of it came out of the simian seminars that Herb DeVoe, your longtime colleague, has run. There's so many evolutionary psychologists and sociobiologists that went through the simian seminar. So that's my take on why they believe they call it evolutionary psychology, was because of this focus on what's going on between the years as opposed to what's going on in the world.
Yeah, that is certainly helpful to me, and I appreciate it. And I admit I haven't really given it that much thought as to exactly what happened and why. Pardon me. It seems to me, and this is taking almost the form of a very good seminar or conference on the subject, and not just a review of the history, that at this point we should all appreciate the distinction made. I've forgotten who made it. It's been ascribed to Erzmeyer, but he didn't do it. It was well before him, between ultimate and approximate causation. And we should bear in mind that cognition and then the machinery of neurobiology underlying cognition and eventually conscious thought is to be explained in an approximate manner. But if we look to the origin, as we'd like to do, particularly when we align ourselves with physical anthropology and cultural anthropology, and paleontology and straightforward evolutionary biology, the emphasis shifts to ultimate causation.
Sure.
In other words, we have a brain of such and so. We have these propensities that I call epigenetic rule, the term never caught on, but the propensity to, a statistical propensity to do one thing as opposed to another, that is genetic in origin, that these things are there, they are to be discovered.
Yep.
They are to be understood in order to understand exactly the nature of the phenomena that we are studying. But if we are to explain their history, or what they mean, how it all came about, why it didn't come out differently, then we must turn to the next level down with biological organization and ultimate causation.
Sure.
So I'm going to those who might listen to this, to point out to you that evolutionary psychology in a very real sense awaits its Darwin. That is to say, it awaits persons who can actually pull it off, a full, from what we know, from what might be the case, a full, ultimate, and proximate causative explanation of human social behavior. If only I were not going on 85. I'm reminded of a famous story about Justice Holmes, who was on his 90th birthday sitting with a friend on a park bench in Washington. An attractive young woman walked by on his 90th birthday, and he said, "Oh, to be 80 again." I wish I could say, I wish I could be 60 or 70 again. And I think you'd find me in action doing this. But I have, or trying it myself, but I've now gotten too much involved in biodiversity and, conservation. And that's where I believe my best effort in the remaining time I have, is best spent. So I'm going to be, I won't be annoying too many of my colleagues working in behavior. I do have one more. I came out with the social conquest of Earth.
Mm-hmm. Which annoyed some.
What?
Which annoyed a few.
Oh, good. There ought to be a kind of equivalent of a noise meter, annoyance meter.
You're not doing it right if you're not annoying some.
I do have one coming out in Oxford in October from Norton, W.W. Norton, and its title is certain to annoy others. Its title is "The Meaning of Human Existence."
Really?
Heavily laden with ultimate explanation, and so that's true. Well, so you haven't heard the last of me yet.